Buenas noches. Nuevamente, bienvenidos. Muchas gracias por su presencia. Es un honor y un privilegio estar en sus pantallas. Gracias. Hoy en la noche vamos a hablar de investigación forense. Esta es una parte muy importante. Sin embargo, como todos los conferencistas, toda la conferencia será en inglés, vamos a hacer un videito de 20 segundos para informarle a aquellos que todavía no conocen cómo llegar al canal de español donde va a haber traducción simultánea. Welcome back. Thank you very much for your time. From now on, we will be doing all the conversation in English. So I hope that those attendees that need Spanish have moved to the Spanish channel. We'll be talking about digital forensic investigation. So what is digital forensic investigation and why? In the security life cycle, one of the final things that we do after we prevent and protect and detect and react is investigate. We need to investigate to know what happened. We need to know who. We need to know what. We need to know when. We need to know if there was damage to our data or there was a data leak or there was something else that compromised our ability to continue providing service. And unfortunately, television now, it is very well known that investigations must be done. CSI and the other programs have made it very romantic and very easy, and with a couple of clicks of the mouse and the keyboard, they know what happened. Unfortunately, it's not that easy, but it is necessary. We need to establish what happened for the purposes I just told you, and we need to learn. So this will not happen next time. And we need to learn the different activities that adversaries are doing with our infrastructure to make sure that it won't happen again and that we are prevented and we can share the information with others to prevent them from being successfully attacked. Today, our panel is world-class, and if you see the length of the biographies or the CVs of the gentlemen that will be in our panel, and I read them, we would spend about 2 hours reading the biography. So I will be very, very short, and I apologize, gentlemen, because this is not fair with you, because you have so many years and so many different activities in your experience that it is unfair. But in order to keep within the time, we will do it very, very short. We'll begin with Juan Mercado. Juan Mercado is information security specialist from the company Celebrate. Celebrate is one of the best known tools for forensic investigation, specifically for mobile devices such as telephones. With Juan will be Christopher Novak. Chris, we have worked together with Chris a couple of investigations, really interesting investigations. He is from Verizon, and he is the co-founder of the Verizon Threat Research Advisory Center. Lots of people working with Chris, lots of investigations being done when the big companies have a problem. One of the people they call is Verizon, and of course, Chris's team. And also with them will be Adam Gray. Adam is the co-founder and Chief Technology Officer of Novacoast. Novacoast is a cybersecurity company based out of California. With Adam, we've been working with their company, and as a matter of fact, we have a partnership with Novacoast called Novacoast Latin America. So our moderator tonight will be Jorge Utrera. Jorge has been in the information business for many years, and I won't tell you how many years because people will start making fun of him and me. So we won't go there, but Jorge has been in forensic investigations for much more than a decade, and most of the very important forensic investigations in our region are led by Jorge. So he will be the moderator tonight. We will go to a short video, and then Jorge will start the panel. Thank you very much for being with us, and welcome again.
SISAP, Sistemas Aplicativos. Durante este tiempo, hemos incursionado en muchas áreas de la tecnología de la información, liderando el mercado a través de la innovación, calidad y servicio al cliente, ofreciendo los siguientes servicios. Arquitectura. RIF-DR, equipo de respuesta a incidentes forenses Data Recovery. Ingeniería y soporte. PMO. SOC. Consultoría. Outsourcing. Capacitaciones. Y Customer Success. Realizamos operaciones en distintos países como Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panamá y República Dominicana. Además, nuestros clientes están situados en Estados Unidos, México, Centroamérica, Colombia, Ecuador, Perú, Chile, Brasil y otros países. Nuestro SOC en Guatemala se sitúa en el edificio Forum Zona Viva. Además, contamos con un segundo SOC en la ciudad de Panamá. Actualmente SISAP está certificado como CERT por parte de la Universidad de Carnegie Mellon, que a través de su software, Engineering Institute, nos ha dado entrada a su red de CERTs. Nuestro personal cuenta con más de 70 certificaciones de SIEM, Malware Reverse Engineering, Penetration Testing, Forensics, Incident Response, entre otras. SISAP, con más de 150 ingenieros trabajando para sus socios comerciales, con más de 1000 certificaciones, alianzas estratégicas con Novacoast, IBM, Verizon, Contributor de Verizon, en donde SISAP contribuye generando reportes e información local recolectada, alimentando el reporte de este año, poniendo en el mapa la región de Centroamérica y el Caribe, que no habían tenido datos significativos anteriormente. También estamos certificados por FIRST, que es una confederación internacional de equipos confiables de respuesta a incidentes informáticos, que manejan cooperativamente incidentes de seguridad informática y promueven programas de prevención de incidentes. SISAP, Sistemas Aplicativos.
Good evening and good night to everyone. Thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you for our panelists. This is the deluxe panelists we have tonight. Please don't forget, we are going to talk about incident response and forensic analysis and their relation. Are they alone? Do they go together? Or that kind of questions. During our session today, we will be talking about how close those both are. And please do not forget to start right now writing up your questions, because we need to pick the brains of these guys. Really, they are world class. Okay, for starters, a very short introduction. What's the difference between an incident and a breach? An incident is an event that affects the 3 dimensions of the information security. Remember, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If one of those is affected, then we have an incident. When do we have a breach? A breach we have when a out of the incident, some data, personal data is stolen or published. That's a breach. Before we go anything further, we need some statistics. The statistics I'm going to mention are directly from the data breach investigation report from Verizon. So let me just mention some of them, some of the causes of the incident. And very simplified, incidents occur because computers are very difficult to secure. And we have humans to secure too. And they are more difficult, also they're most difficult to secure. And now, on the others, we have also the so-called Internet of Things. And the question is, can we secure those? Maybe we secure this thing that talks to internet by just throwing it away. Or the patching is that. Nobody patches IoTs. So all of those together make the perfect storm to have incidents, some of them very big. So just to mention some of the causes, social engineering to cause big incidents, ransomware everywhere, mining, crypto mining, third parties that are in our company, contractors that we give access to our network. How I already mentioned the IoT vulnerabilities. If there are, nobody patches them. The other day, I have the brightest, not the very brightest idea to change all my SSIDs at home, and I discovered that I have at home 21 things talking to the internet. Scary. So the other thing is, if you don't have an incident response plan, that causes itself an incident. Many companies don't have a dedicated incident response team. Forensics, always a constant backlog, always behind in everything that we do, that they do. So we all suffer or have incidents daily. Most of them are small, medium, but there are also very large ones. And almost no organization, no matter how big it is, has the ability to manage a major security breach on its own. Why? Because for the simple reason that it is very difficult to have a team of experts in all the possible vectors of the attack or the possible problems that can arise. What the companies need is a company that can help them in attending those large incidents. So they require a global incident response partner who have the ability to react fast and mitigate the incident. So in this session, we are going to explore some of the challenges that these super specialized cyber fighters respond when we have security incident. So without further ado, I am going to start with Adam. Adam, I have a two-part question. How important are the incident response processes if you think on the frameworks like NIST and SANS? And the second part is, how do we help customers to respond better?
So in general, I'll tell you that if you don't have the process figured out, you're already broken, because the reality is that you're going to have a security incident. The magnitude of that incident is unknown at this point, but in general, you're going to have some type of security incident this month, this year, or further out. And if you don't have the process well defined, I think you're much further behind. Now, as part of that, choosing the right process is important. But I'll tell you, pick one of the standards, right? Pick NIST, pick ISO. If you're NIST, follow the cybersecurity framework. If you want to do CIS, follow those. Don't believe for a minute that you can take a conglomeration of the different standards and the different models and then go and build your own. There's a reason that these organizations exist, and they exist specifically to provide the kind of guidance you need to build the appropriate plan.
Thank you, Adam. Chris, is there a difference between incident response and forensics analysis? Do they always go together? Do they need to go together? Some examples?
Yeah, so there is a kind of an interesting nuance to those. So the way I would describe it is typically, and in fact, we do the same with the data breach investigations report. We look at both kind of incidents and breaches, and we look at incident response and forensic analysis. And historically, incident response is generally looked at as the incident is ongoing and active now, and you need to be able to assess what the criticality and the impacts of it are. What is maybe the entry vector or the mechanism in which a threat actor is moving through an environment, and what actions might you need to take kind of in the more immediate now time in order to be able to address and contain it. Versus typically we look at forensic analysis or digital forensics as typically kind of I'd almost say the after aspect of it. So after you believe that the dangerous critical situation has been relatively contained, you can now kind of comb through all the evidence and the artifacts to try to figure out more details about what exactly happened. Maybe during the incident response, you were not able to assess the root cause aspect of it, but maybe during the forensic side of things, you're able to more accurately address that, and then using that for recommendations and next steps. So as part of your after-action review, for example, it would typically feed off of the results of your forensic analysis. The two don't necessarily always have to go together, but they often do. Typically, incident response would be the first thing that you would do when you identify the fact that an incident has occurred, and then typically the forensic analysis would follow. But there are times where we get called in very far after the fact. For example, an organization might have completely missed the incident response window. They might have had an incident, it occurred, it may have ended on its own, or they may have been unaware of the fact they even had an incident, took action accidentally or inadvertently, contained the incident. For example, best one I've seen is a situation where an organization has a exposed vulnerability, and without even realizing it, they may have been compromised. They then subsequently patch the vulnerability and may have contained their incident, and they may only find out about the fact that the incident even occurred weeks or months later, in which case the only thing that may remain is the forensic analysis to figure out exactly what happened and give them the confidence that they have in fact contained it and can move forward with other remediation measures.
Thanks, Chris. I will hold that thought there, but we'll come back to it later. Juan, good evening, Juan. From the point of view of forensic analysis, Juan, depending on an incident. In a new incident is what may be the low-hanging fruits, which are called easy targets, when tackling initially the forensic analysis. Please elaborate if possible.
Well, it's kind of a hard question, in this time where what you call low-hanging fruit is getting harder and harder to access, basically, it's very hard to know where to start. Data is only growing and is getting bigger and bigger by the day. So I will say that every incident and every case and every investigation is different. Every investigation, every case, every incident has its own data sources, its own methodology, and its own way to approach the situation that will get you it will get you in a state or in a place, if I may, where you have to basically tackle all this data, which can be very big or just big enough. But in that case, forensic analysis, I would say that the analysis is moving toward a holistic approach in which you can combine or sort of analyze at the same time all this data in a way that you can sort and filter this information in order to get that low-hanging fruit, which in my opinion is not that low, because of all the things that you may have to do in order to access that data and in order to get the data, and of course, process it, index it, and analyze it. So given that, as I say before, every case is different, I will refrain from telling something that may apply to some, but not to some others. Every data source, everything needs to be like, for every case, it needs to be sorted out individually, specifically for the case.
Thank you, Juan. That makes sense, definitely. Now I have a question for all three, and it's about how about we are in the middle of a pandemic. It's COVID-19, and in the order Adam, Chris, and Juan, what incident response challenges have you experienced during COVID-19? Chris, first, please.
Go ahead, Chris.
Excuse me. Adam first, I'm sorry.
Of course.
I am sorry.
So on the incident response and home, we have a lot of work from home employees, not only in our own organization currently, as most of our SOC, our SOC is still manned, but we're supporting a lot of work from home, and we've had a tremendous amount of IR work this spring and through the summer, and not being able to get at the systems physically has meant that we've had a lot more on the process, a lot more on specialized tools, and a lot more on sort of traditional methods before physical access was great. Things like external logging sources and application execution capabilities, and really relying on customized toolkits to go find the information we need. And so the work from home and the current pandemic has made access much harder, but it's also brought a tremendous rise in breaches for us as well. And so keeping up with the level of work has also been a challenge, as that there are just not people globally doing this kind of work across all the organizations, and it's been a significant setback to have these devices now distributed across the world.
Yeah, I would actually agree with everything that Adam said. And in fact, I would add to it that one of the things that we found was, historically, when we did breach investigations, it would often be on site. And typically our clients would ask, almost demand, that we have people that come on site and work with them for the evidence collection and so on. And now obviously all that's changed with COVID. Going on site in many locations may not be feasible, may not be allowable. And so we've leaned a lot more on additional technology. So for example, we often would use an endpoint agent or a network capture device in order to collect evidence and artifacts for use in the investigation, maybe even pull down forensic images using an agent remotely. And that's something that we're leaning even more heavily on, because in some cases our clients may not even be able to go into their own data centers due to various restrictions and get the data and make it available to us, let alone have us go in. The other thing that we're also leaning more heavily on is leveraging cloud. So the ability for our clients to be able to actually upload evidence and artifacts or make that available to us via a cloud instance, and then we can analyze it there and provide them the results. In some cases, that's given us other levels of efficiency. But one of the things that I really pushed on my team very hard to do was the moment we saw, parts of the world starting to go into lockdown, we really pushed hard on making sure that everybody was extraordinarily well versed in all the different remote capture and analytics platforms that we use. Even if, maybe it was something that they didn't all necessarily use previously, we had to make sure that everyone was, at that subject matter expert level and quickly.
Thank you, Chris. Juan?
I do agree with my fellow panelists, and I will add that the fact that we are in home, working or anyway quarantined or something like that, is just allowing many of the adversaries that people face or our customer faces in both the public sector and the private sector. Those adversaries, just by the fact that they are spending more time sitting in front of the computer and at home to do the things that they usually do at night or something like that, is, for example, for some of our public sector customers, is exploding the amount of cases and the amount of incidents, be those incidents of public safety or information security, whatever they are facing an explosion of incidents and cases that it's basically challenging their workforce. Because they have a limited amount of money and of people in order to work these cases, they are facing challenges in that way, not only because, as my fellow panelists said, because they cannot go to the site and perform the activities that they usually perform, or are not even allowed to enter their own data center, but also because of you have to spread now these resources, and you have to look for, basically help them to look for ways in order for them to do much more with the same amount of resources. So it's a very complex challenge that we are facing because of the COVID-19 situation, the pandemic. But I think with proper tools, proper training of the people, the experience of these teams, we're gonna walk it through. We're gonna fight it out.
Thanks, Juan. And next question is to you too. Again, I mentioned before that the sheer volume of evidence is huge, and we need to process it as fast as possible. It is growing, big data. How to cope with that huge volume of data? I read about AI. I think you can tell us something about that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I do represent a vendor, which is basically, among others, offering tools, analytical tools, powered by artificial intelligence and by neuronal networks and by like all these terms in order to cope with this data. And it's basically what Celebrite tries to offer. More than a tool, is a vision. No matter if you later decided to execute that vision with different tools or whatever, but the idea is for us to give you our vision of how to cope with this amount of data and with all those different data sources that you may encounter. And it's basically an analytical tool which can ingest all this data that you may collect from cell phone devices, from computer devices, servers, but that in some cases, you will also collect from telecommunication companies or from DVR systems or for any of the, let's say, digital data sources that exist on the field. And the idea is to process it and basically relate to each data source everything that is in common. May those be documents or cell phone data. Look for those commonalities on the data and display it to you in a friendly manner. That is the way, and that is our vision of how to cope with all this amount of information. And of course, we have our own solution, but basically the idea is for you to access and to be able to review all this data from all these data sources in just one platform, all consolidated and in a friendly user interface that you can understand very rapidly and that your workforce can understand very rapidly without having to be like a professional in technology or all those kinds of stuff that very limit the adoption of the technological tools in all our customers.
Thank you, Juan. Adam and Chris, I have a two-part question about what best practices can we use to effective response to modern threats. What I mean is a super rapid response. What would be the recommendations to our customers to respond quickly? What do they need to do? What kind of readiness they need to have in order to respond efficiently? Adam, and then Chris.
So I'll say from a response perspective, to be efficient, there's a few things that I like to see organizations have set up. We talked earlier about having an incident response plan, and that's critical because that's going to give you the layout of what you need. To physically be able to respond quickly, it's probably appropriate to have run a simulation or a tabletop exercise of what a response should entail. And this is usually done with a outside organization as part of it. So when I look at incident response as a whole, have the plan, have completed a tabletop, have a set of tooling that you and your IR provider have agreed on, have that tooling in place and deployed if it's appropriate, or with the ability to deploy quickly if needed, and then have the appropriate monitoring set up so that you have a chance to actually catch an incident early. So good logging, good process control, good ability to see traffic, all of the things that are necessary to actually be able to see happening off of an endpoint. And then finally, have an IR retainer set up with your IR outsourcing group so that you have start to finish a complete plan in place that would take you minutes to execute and not hours or days.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I would agree 100% with everything that Adam said. I would add a couple of things. One is we similarly recommend the tabletop exercises. I think that's a fantastic resource for any organization. And also, obviously, having a retainer in place gets all the contracting dirty work taken care of. You don't have to get involved with, lawyers, procurement, pricing, things like that. It's all negotiated and done in advance. The other thing that I would say, though, that we've seen a significant benefit from something we call executive breach simulations. And that is kind of, think of a tabletop exercise. Typically, we look at that as being more technical in nature. So we would walk through, threat actor has done X, what are you doing? Or evidence is done in this way, how would you analyze it? Whereas the executive breach simulation typically engages the higher level stakeholders. So this may be the C-suite, it may be the general counsel, it may even be some outside or external stakeholders that would play a role in an incident or a breach investigation. And the reason why I say to do those breach simulations with them, even if it's non-technical, and maybe especially if it's non-technical, is because a lot of times some of the challenges we find that we face that are difficult to overcome are not technical. It's not how do we do this process or how do we do this analytics. It may be that we need this senior level executive to sign off on taking a box offline or turning off an application or rolling a backup. And if they're unaware of what the implications of that are or what the consequences are of either taking the action or not taking the action, then sometimes we find ourselves in a situation where there may be a lot of political infighting or different groups have different goals or agendas for how certain things should happen, when in reality, a lot of that should have been hammered out in advance. And I think a lot of times the executives in many organizations will think that their technical folks will take care of everything, but sometimes there are some really difficult decisions. You know, for example, we see this a lot in financial services where there'll be a very critical system that needs to be taken offline in order to contain the breach. But taking that system offline, if there's not appropriate redundancy or backups, or maybe they've been affected by the breach too, will also essentially take offline maybe the financial institution's processing capabilities or investment capabilities, and there's a substantial reputational or business hit that the organization may face that needs to be explained and understood. So doing those simulations, I think, is very valuable. And then in addition to that, understanding at what point you plan to engage an outsider for help. You know, at the end of the day, you can have the most robust internal capabilities, but I always recommend having a third party that you can engage for support, like Adam also mentioned, having that retainer in place. But just as important as having that retainer contract in place and knowing who you're going to call is knowing what is your trigger point to call them. Because we oftentimes will see, in fact, we just had this discussion earlier today because this past weekend was a holiday in the US, and we must have had 12 new calls that came in on Friday. And someone who was not in the industry said, why do you see so many things that come in on a Friday? And my theory on that is lots of organizations will try to take the incident as far as they possibly can go, and then all of a sudden they hit up against a weekend. And they know that it's going to be different kinds of challenges that all of a sudden they're going to face when they encounter the weekend. Certain facilities may not be opened, or certain things may not be as easily obtainable or reachable. Or at that point, they just know, hey, I'm going to need extra help. I've done everything I could possibly do this week, and that is kind of their demarc. And what I always suggest is have a technical point or a part in your incident response process where you say, if we've gotten to this point and we haven't satisfied certain objectives, or if it's taken longer than a certain amount of time to get to this point, we automatically pull the trigger at that point and we go ahead and bring in our outside support, because you don't want to wait until all of a sudden now the executives are breathing down your back, or maybe it's made public news and now all of a sudden any timeline you thought you had has been accelerated dramatically. You'd like to be able to get that moving as early as possible. So those would be the things that I would add to what Adam said.
Thanks. The next one is about training. How do we make an incident responder? What kind of training? What does he need to know? Can you elaborate, Adam, please?
Decades of experience is a good start. They're not done overnight. I mean, that's the reality is that our IR team, and I know I know Verizon's as well. I've worked with them a bunch over the years. These guys are not new to this game. This is not something where they've taken a junior person and put them in front of running this stuff. In general, the skill set that you need tends to fall fall into a couple of different categories. You're either working on the PR side of the house and helping with messaging and with the executive side. You're working on the technical field, and in that case, you're either going to be networking, systems, or development, and often having a minimum of 2 of those 3 is important. So from a skills perspective and what do you need, it is critical to have very senior staff doing this kind of work and have people with appropriate development or appropriate reverse engineering skills, or the ability to have done a lot of forensics. You know, DoD and law enforcement is typical for the forensic side and not so much on the IR side.
Thank you, Adam. The next question is regarding some of the experiences you have on the field. For example, Chris and his team has been at least 3 times in this region attending incidents. I have the privilege to be in one. And the question is, can you share a couple of experiences regarding what problems, what obstacles found attending the engagements? Could be language barriers, local law, physical security, the time spent. Can you share some anecdotes with us, please? Let's start with Chris, please.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say all of those are definitely real challenges. I would say that, you know, we've been doing this now for I think just over 20 years, and so definitely there's a lot of experience, you know, at the business level. Verizon is a giant organization with an army of lawyers, and so we try to put them to good use, and we have them definitely do research for us. So we're approved now to do incident response and forensic work, and I think it's up to 120 countries. And every time we approve a country, we look at those kinds of things. So for example, we look at, you know, languages spoken, languages that we have in our team, visas in the event someone needs to travel if they're not local. What is the requirement for visas? We map that out with all of the people on our team to determine who either already has the visas or who would be most easily able to obtain a visa, what the laws and regulations are in that country. In fact, even within countries, the laws can vary, where we see, for example, there are places where you may need to have a specific license to do certain work, or there may be licenses that you need, for example, if you're dealing with certain types of data, you know, PII, PCI, things like that require certain licenses or accreditations. And then also there's things like encryption. There's a variety of different ways in which encryption needs to be handled around the world. And then on top of that, it is also moving data. So, you know, it's easy to do work on site at a customer location because generally speaking, you're not moving anything. But the moment you then take that data and move it somewhere else, you run into issues with things like understanding data privacy and data sovereignty laws and what obligations you may have to protect that data or handle it in certain circumstances if you're moving it from one location to another. So I would say those are all things that we look at very closely and have that all mapped out so that whenever we resource an engagement, we can be looking at those aspects before we put either resources on the ground or plug in remotely with all of that. But, you know, it's always something that we try to examine and re-examine after particular cases that may be challenging, just to see if there's updates that, that we may need to make.
Thank you, Chris. Adam, do you have a comment about that?
I mean, I think it's pretty similar. I mean, the level of work and the background on those things, you know, country by country is so different. I don't think there's much more to add. I think it's probably, you know, a pretty good response there.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a question for Adam, but anyone can answer because this is I smoked this one. What could be the future of the incident response? Let's say next generation incident response. Is the human going to be obsolete? Adam.
No, humans are still not going to be obsolete. I look at where we're at today with machine learning and AI. And while strides are being made, we're still not seeing a strong replacement of people in the SOCs and incident responders. We are seeing more machine learning look for anomalies, and we are seeing more capabilities in that space, but the maturity is still very, very far off. When I think of next generation incident response, I think of deeper analysis on running systems and having the incident response kicked off earlier because findings have gotten better. We've had this big shift over the years from running log consolidation to running EDR to running MDR to XDR and tying it to threat intel and doing all of these projects that help us get the data. And we now have so much data coming in that dealing with that data has become a challenge. But when I look at the next generation of where we're going, I actually think we still need more data. I don't think we have everything we need across the environments in the way we need it to make good, fast decisions. And I think that's going to be the next paradigm shift, is the kind of data you pick up in relation to security events so that you can find incidents and you can bring the mean time to resolution down. Right? Today we're at 200 days for detection or more, I think, right now. And the goal should be getting that down to hours, minutes, or seconds from an incident.
Thank you, Adam. Before asking the same question to Juan, I would like to comment on something. I've been there. I've been on site, and when you deploy a tool to scan the machines, I've never encountered an easy form to do it and fast form to do it. It always takes a lot of things. And let's say, for example, a healthy Active Directory or whatever. But it takes like 2 to 5 days to have the agents in place. But the other day, I don't want to mention the company, put in an ad that they can, in minutes, scan, put the agent in thousands of computers. Are they lying, or I need to buy new tools? Chris, please.
Sure. So I would say there's maybe a little bit of truth and maybe a little bit of fiction, depends on who the vendor is. I've definitely seen dramatic improvements in the endpoint agent space. There's a number of different ones that we utilize, as well as some homegrown tools that we've built over the decades. So I would say that they've definitely gotten faster. Usually what I tell clients is that in some cases we can roll it out very fast. We may be able to roll out to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of endpoints in a day. But all the stars really need to align in order to make that work. They need to have all the right configurations on their routers, switches, and firewalls to allow the agent to be able to be pushed out, or they need to have a good remote deployment tool that will allow us to touch all the endpoints. Otherwise, there's typically always a little bit of back and forth work that you need to do to make sure that the endpoint agents can actually get fully deployed without too much issue. The other thing we also tend to find that works well is we always, and kind of going back to your early question as to whether or not, the human will be obsolete, I think for the foreseeable future, it will not, for reasons like this, where I think the reasoning and problem solving and critical thinking that the human aspect brings to the forensic investigation is extraordinarily valuable. Trying to do that with AI today, it's just not there. And the fact that we can't always guarantee that we can deploy an endpoint agent uniformly and seamlessly also means that we really need people who can plug into the process and say, look, based on the initial scoping conversation, we believe that this network segment or that network segment is probably the most likely area where the problem either started or where the majority of the damage is occurring. Let's start with deploying the agent there. So kind of pick a target spot and then expand into other parts of the organization until you've got the footprint that you need in order to be able to drive the confidence that you have the right level of visibility.
Thank you, Chris. I'm a believer in science fiction. And what I'm going to see is I'm afraid of Skynet, if you remember what I'm meaning. Yeah, all of you know that, yeah? So humans, I prefer humans still. Then we have jobs. Yeah. So one, what would be the future of forensics? Next generation.
Yeah, let me tell you, Skynet is not on the horizon yet. Don't worry for him. What I think we can take advantage of is machines, the machine learning, the artificial intelligence that we have. While there's now the maturity, we're not there yet. I think that we can take advantage of the way that information can be sorted and filtered with machines and all that. But I think the human element, it's critical, it's fundamental in the forensic analysis, how to interpret things and how to read things and how to get things, and especially how to collaborate between teams of different professions with different backgrounds. I think that's crucial in forensic. We see very much law enforcement and prosecutorial, also military backgrounds, that kind of stuff. And it's unbelievable the things that some of these officials do with some of the resources that they are handed, and with all the difficulties in many of the countries. I think the human element is critical, and training for those human elements, be training on the review side, on the analysis side, or be training on the technical side, on the technology. It's one of the most fundamentals that I can see for the foreseeable future in forensic analysis. But I do think that we can take advantage of some of the things that the machines can do much better, much faster than us. Sort information, especially the machine learning, the document, the text extraction and analysis that the machines can do. Also, the correlation between different data sources, that kind of stuff. It's amazing, but it's always to be reviewed and to be managed by the human element, by an official, basically.
Thank you. Moving on, and a little bit faster because the time is not running out, but we are going to talk a little bit about cloud forensics, cloud incident. It's the way, it's happening. Everybody's going to the cloud. We have now any kind, and lots of different solutions. We have on-demand self-service. We have everyone is going to the cloud. And the question for Chris is, are there any difference between conducting investigations on the different cloud computing models? And I mean is IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS.
Yes, so I would say there's a lot of differences there, actually, and probably some of the biggest is that a lot of it has to do with the way the environment is set up. So when you think about the traditional way that we would do forensics and incident response, we'd have access to kind of the bare metal system. We'd be able to go as low level as we need to go to pull as much data as we need. When you're in these different types of cloud-based environments, whether it's infrastructure, software, platform as a service, your level of depth that you can get from a forensic standpoint typically is going to be more limited. And so if you don't already have certain evidentiary artifacts set to be preserved, for example, if you don't have certain logging and audit trails on, you may not be able to go a level lower than that in order to extract them. So, for example, if you didn't have something on or you didn't have something retained, in an old school non-cloud environment, you might have been more readily able to grab a full disk image and parse data out of unallocated space and recover certain data that maybe was lost or not retained. In many of these other cloud-based models, if you didn't turn it on to begin with, or if you didn't retain it long enough, your ability to go back and get that may be next to impossible just by virtue of the vendor that you're using may not give you the technical access in order to do it. So I would typically say anybody that is either moving to a model like that or already in a model like that, and I want to clarify, even we talk about this in our data breach investigations report, that those models are not inherently bad, they're not inherently insecure or anything like that. It's all about knowing how to secure them, right? Just like if you're hosting your own, web server or mail server or some other application, you would need to know the fundamentals of how you secure the operating system, the infrastructure, and the applications that reside there. You need to make sure that you also have subject matter expertise, or you engage an appropriately accredited third party that has that expertise to ensure that it is equally secured and that you have the underlying information, logs, and artifacts to be able to support a forensic investigation or incident response effort should it need to be done.
Thanks, Chris. And there is surely a whole lot of new skills needed to tackle for the people who attend those incidents, as Adam mentioned. One, about cloud forensics. How to do it efficiently? How would you, what in your opinion for cloud forensics? We lost you, Juan.
Maybe he's muted.
Can you hear me? Okay. So about cloud forensics,
Okay.
basically, we will have a situation in which you do not fully control the information and the information asset that you're going to basically extract information from. So in those kinds of scenarios, you need to be really careful and you need to be clear on the procedures that you're gonna execute in order to get that information. Be the information later be used to prosecute an individual or for an incident response or an internal investigation that is being conducted inside a company. You need to have all those factors in mind in order to get the proper information and know what specifically is being changed or is being modified or is going to alert somebody of that you are getting that information. What I mean is that in the cloud, where you are not able to control every single aspect of the server that is holding that information and all the security measures in place before you can get that information, the only way that you can conduct this kind of procedures is to basically knowing very thoroughly whatever you're gonna do and know the impact beforehand, because you may be alerting somebody or you may be modifying some information and that kind of stuff. There are many tools to basically automate this procedure and to get containers from the cloud and that kind of stuff. And I would recommend that you test every tool available with different scenarios in order to do it efficiently. And most of the times the problem is not to get the data, but to secure the data that you already have, and that data is later or can be later used as evidence or as information with credibility. And that is the most important aspect of how, of the information that you can get from the cloud, basically. About the tools, again, there are many tools, there are many vendors, and they can automate most of the procedures. Some of them support some data sources from some services. This one supports Azure, this one not. This one supports Amazon, this one not. And I basically recommend to use those tools, but you need to be really careful about those tools because you are never gonna be able to control the environment in which you are deploying those tools.
Thank you, Juan. Adam, speaking of readiness, but this time in the cloud environment, what considerations could you say about that in this environment?
So in the current environment with cloud, I think there's a few things that have to happen. One is people have to stop pretending that they have a perimeter at this point, and they either need to take the perimeter back and not allow people to talk to cloud applications directly, and really proxy people back in through the infrastructures they control and tightly, lock them down. Or two, if they're not going to use sort of that control method, they need to start deploying workloads in highly automated ways such that they can deal with the necessary controls through automation. One of the great things about the cloud is that it allows you to be very flexible and deploy stuff very quickly, but the negative of the cloud is also that very same thing, that it allows you to deploy things quickly can also mean that you don't deploy them with the most prudent options. If you don't use the appropriate options and we start having to now move to incident response, your access to those tools are only as good as the APIs that they provide. So more mature cloud providers like Amazon and Azure and others in that space have some of the tooling necessary to do forensics, but not everything that you might need or want, or if you didn't deploy it properly, you might not have the logs or access to the data that you now require. And so I really go back again to planning as the key takeaway for cloud infrastructures. In our own organization, I look at that as twofold. One is control access, and two is automate and control that automation very early in the cycle so that you can apply security to it. And then three, have that plan as a final piece of what are you going to do when there is a problem and how will you go ahead and deal with it.
Thank you, Adam. Chris, surely there is a main concern regarding how to extract the digital evidence in a sound and admissible in court manner. What do you cope in this cloud environment? How do you cope with that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And this goes back to having the policies and procedures in place. What I tell people is, we are often working with law enforcement, for example, on a lot of our investigations. And, typically it is not just the tools that make that admissible. It is also the methodology and procedures that are used. And so what I always tell people is, and most people are excited about the tools. They want to go out and buy exciting new technology that does new things that they couldn't do yesterday, and that's fine. But what I would say is it's just as important, in some cases maybe more important, that you have documented methodology that says, when I'm gathering data from this environment and I want to use this as evidence, I'm going to gather it in this manner, and these are the steps I'm going to follow. Because that, one, ensures that you actually do it the way you plan or intend to. And then also it ensures consistency, so that in the event anything that you do is challenged, you can go back to your methodology, that you can say, look, we have planned this methodology, we have tested it, it's based on industry standards or best practices. Maybe we've even had a third party that has vetted it for us. And then that way, that should give you a much better ability for that evidence to actually be able to be admissible or stand up in court. But typically, otherwise, it just comes back to kind of what both Adam and Juan were saying as it relates to making sure that you have the right in-place capabilities, configurations, APIs, et cetera, in order to actually be able to gather it to begin with.
Thank you, Chris. So we come to our the session final. In order, Adam, Chris, and Juan, any final thoughts on recommendations? Adam, please.
Yeah, I think it's really simple. Plan early, plan often, test your plan, right? That's from a recommendations perspective. I can't make it, I can't stress that enough, and I can't make it more simple than that, in that if you're not testing your plan and you're not running through the appropriate IR activities, when they do happen, you won't be ready.
Adam, Chris?
Yeah. And I would agree with exactly what Adam said there. And, you know, what I always tell people is if you're not testing your plans, if you're not testing anything, right? You know, for example, I tell people, be doing vulnerability scanning, be doing penetration testing, be doing all of these things, because if you're not doing them, I can guarantee you the threat actors are always doing them. They're always testing and looking to see where they can find a soft spot in your organization. The downside is obviously they're generally not telling you what they're doing and what they're finding. So you want to make sure that you're getting out there and really kicking the tires on what it is that you're doing and how it is that you would go about it to make sure that you are as best prepared as you possibly can be. Knowing what assets you have, knowing how they're connected, knowing where your sensitive data is critical to the success of your incident response, actually giving you the outcomes you want and expect.
Thank you. Chris, one closing comment?
From the forensic standpoint, we do have a saying, validate, validate, validate. I do agree with Chris and with Adam. And in the forensic world, validation is everything. As they say before, it's not the tools what makes information prosecutable or valuable. It's the procedures and the tools and the experience of the personnel and the training and all that stuff combined, what makes the process secured and what makes that information valuable and prosecutable in the case that you need to do that. So I know there is no much time for the customers. They are busy with the day-to-day operations or by the routine and all that stuff. But please bear in mind, I know that salespeople will never tell a lie, but please validate, be prepared, be ready, and stay healthy in these times of pandemic.
Thank you. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Chris. And the same for you, yeah? Stay healthy. We have a couple of questions from the audience. Let me pick. We cannot see all, but one of them is already answered by Adam about the skills for a cyber forensic analyst. It's already answered. And I need to take my glasses off because I can see, sorry. What to look for in a behavioral analytics tools besides artificial intelligence and machine learning? Anyone care to answer that? What to look for in a behavioral analytic tool besides AI and ML?
If I may?
Please.
Go ahead.
I will say that it all depends on your methodology to basically review the information. If you like to analyze documents, if you like to analyze logs, that kind of information, I will say that you need to first ensure that all your data sources, or at least your most important data sources, are going to be supported by these analytical engines that are going to run machine learning and that are going to run text analytics, media analytics, whatever. And the second thing is that make sure that your process, the way that you process information, how you get it from the field and how you process it in order to pass it along and to give it to people that is going to review information, make sure that your tool fits that process. because you cannot take the full advantage of a tool that is going to be, for example, only one person is going to be able to use it because it's very complex, or because it's sitting in a computer, in a very powerful computer that only one person can access, that kind of stuff for the analytical tools. That will be my 2 cents on that.
Thank
And
you,
something I
Juan.
would just add to what Juan said as well is I would also look to see if there's anything that the vendor has provided around, third-party attestations or reviews. There's a lot of tools out there. For example, if you look at the analyst community, there's a lot of analysts that review and write about their opinions on specific technologies and what those technologies, in their view, should be capable of doing, or where they see the market need going. And so if you're unsure as to what capabilities might really be valuable, or what is real and what works well, the analyst community is typically a good place to go, because typically they're not selling anything other than their research and their opinions, but they're typically not selling the products. So you can always kind of look and see what it is that they're talking about as well.
Thank you, Chris. There's another one about the pandemic. And the question is about if you have measured how much more incidents have you experienced as when last year was this pandemic? How much is the growth in and complexity of the cases? If any.
So I'm happy to jump on that as well. So we actually saw initially, when the pandemic started, we actually saw a decline. And ultimately what I attribute a lot of that to was organizations spending most of their time and effort trying to figure out how to get their workforce remote. And so it was less about monitoring and looking for things and more about, let's just get our people safe. So for a period of time, we actually saw a decline in activity. And my true belief on this is not that we actually saw a decline in malicious threat actor activity, but that in reality, what I think it was is decreased monitoring and overview and overwatch of organizations' assets. And then what we've now seen is a significant rise. So we're seeing more cases now than we saw in the same period last year, which I think is organizations that now have gotten back into kind of a groove or a new normal. Now that they're in kind of pandemic mode, they figured out how to do their work from home monitoring. Their SOCs are back and operational, and they're probably catching up and seeing things that maybe they missed in the weeks and months before. The thing that I'm most concerned about, though, to be honest, is, and I think Adam mentioned this before as well, is that, typically the discovery time for a breach is hundreds of days. On average, we're looking at probably about 7 to 8 months to discover the fact that a breach has even occurred. So if you consider that in conjunction with the timing of the pandemic, there's probably a lot of incidents and breaches that have not yet even been discovered from that early time period. And if you consider the couple of months there where I would say most organizations were not operating at 100%, I think there's going to be 7 to 8 months down that, we're going to see another surge in incident and breach activity as those events are ultimately discovered. And we may actually even see a bit of elongation in the discovery time, because I don't think most organizations' SOC and discovery and detection capabilities are really operating at the same level of efficiency as they would have if they were all in their normal setting with their easy access to all their tools.
Yeah, I'll add to that. We had about a 30% increase in incident-related activities and IR responses in the late spring. So from about that middle March into end of June, July. From July on, we've seen a significant uptick. July and August, that work was pretty steady with 50% year over year. And the end of August till now has increased even again, and we are running at pretty full capacity at this point for incidents, and that's about 60% over what we saw last year at this time. And so for us, it was a lot of work came through. A lot of it was people onboarding their work from home staff into managed platforms that we operate, and us finding problems in doing that. And from that work, we've seen significant increases in incident-related traffic.
Thank you, Anna. There is another one. What should consider an incident response plan for a company that cannot afford to have a specialist in-house? What would be the basic steps on what to do? I would say call SISAP, but maybe they can do another step before. Can you? Yes.
Yeah, that's the common issue. Most groups don't have appropriate staff for IR on staff, which is why kind of my first pass at that earlier tonight was to talk about getting outside help, so that you have that plan built and you have it tested. There's very little chance that most organizations are going to have all of the appropriate staff and all of the appropriate skill sets internally in their organization, unless they are very large and have a significant amount of effort put in that place. I see very few organizations with the appropriate staff, so most are in that position, and they should just simply be partnering with an outside organization.
Thank you, Adam. There are more questions, but we are going to answer them individually. I thank you for your time. Mauricio is coming up as to wrap it up. Thank you very much and good night. Buenas noches.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Chris, Adam, and Juan, thank you for the wealth of knowledge and all the experience you brought to the panel. And thanks, Jorge, for your time as well and experience. There are going to be more questions, and we will forward the questions we cannot answer directly to the panelists for their help, and we will publish both the questions and the recording of the session. So thank you very much, everybody, especially our panelists, for spending the time and sharing the knowledge and experience with us. Fantastic panel, and there's a wealth of knowledge here to apply to our companies, and many, many things to do. So if you need any help, we will share the addresses of the panelists in our own, so you could call us and ask for help. We definitely will be looking forward to more questions and be able to help. Thank you very much and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.